I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Blue Stack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. And I'm very happy today to be here at Salins, is it?
Salins, yeah.
Yes, with Kenneth Matthews, who's head of the Irish Wind Energy Association.
Yes.
Kenneth, you're very welcome. Kenneth, could you tell the audience what the Irish Wind Energy Association is and just generally what it does?
I can indeed, Robert. So IWEA has been in existence for 20 years now, actually 22 years now. And over that period of time, we've been working with our members and with stakeholders to promote and advocate the integration of wind energy onto the power system in Ireland. And over the last 22 years, we've went from effectively 0 megawatts of wind energy to 2,350 megawatts today. And those 2,350 megawatts today in the Republic of Ireland represents 20% of the national demand in 2014.
Okay.
So in terms of the driving force behind the renewables industry in Ireland and renewables penetration, or should I say wind penetration onto the Irish system, IWEA has been at the forefront and led that transition particularly over the last 10 years.
And now, when did you join IWEA?
I joined IWEA almost to the day of this interview 4 years ago.
4 years ago, okay.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And where were you before?
Before that, I spent 14 years in ESB, but two separate parts of ESB. ESB National Grid, which is now called EirGrid, the transmission system operator, and then after that, ESB Power Generation.
And how many members are there in IWEA?
So we have 180 company members,
Uh-huh.
and that is spread out. 130 company members are in the Republic of Ireland, and jointly with Renewables UK, we run an organisation in Northern Ireland called NIREG, Northern Ireland Renewable Industry Group, that looks after the needs of our members, our 60 odd members in Northern Ireland together. And that's proven to be quite successful over the last number of years.
Now, what's the relationship between IWEA and the Northern Ireland organisation? Are you legally connected, or is it just an association?
So it's a committee within our main structure, and both IWEA and Renewables UK jointly resource NIREG to be able to deliver for its members in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
So it's an association in its own right in Northern Ireland, but it's under the wing and under the leadership and guise of IWEA and Renewables UK.
Okay, and funded by
IWEA funded by IWEA and Renewables UK and their members.
Are there any wind farms that straddle both sides of the border?
I believe there is one that is very much straddling or fringing or just about creeping across the border in Cavan, but it certainly it tends to not be an issue that we would have to deal with because of different approaches to planning, obviously different approaches in terms of support schemes and logistically the challenges of an infrastructure like that crossing the border.
Right, so it's very complicated.
Very complicated, but having said that, over the last, if we look at from 2007 to now, and one of the overarching principles that was delivered as part of the last white paper was the integration of a single electricity market.
Right.
And that has been, if we look back over the energy policy in Ireland over the last number of years, nobody could say that hasn't been a resounding success, both for consumers, for the electricity industry as a whole, for regulation, for inward investment, and for I suppose the stability of the electricity network in Ireland. At present, we're going through a process to integrate the Irish market to what is called the EU target model, which will allow trading of energy across borders right into Europe. But in effect, what it essentially is it's like putting a box over Ireland and a box over England, and making the interconnectors that are connected to the two islands work really well together, for trading of energy at the most competitive price for the consumers on both islands. So there's the opportunity that, in theory anyway, there's the opportunity that this new market structure can continue to reduce prices for consumers, and that can only be a good thing. However, one of the concerns we would have as an association that represents members right across the spectrum, from individual developers, family-run businesses that have built one or two small wind farms, to larger utilities. There's a very penal implications of having to put the processes and procedures in place to be able to trade your energy in this new complicated system called ISEM, and we will be working hard with the regulators, both north and south, to ensure that the opportunity continues to exist for smaller players to actively participate in this market. And if we look back over particularly the last 10 years, that's been one of the resounding successes of Irish wind energy, is that it's not dominated by a few larger players, or it's not dominated by a few medium-sized players. Everybody has an opportunity to partake, and that has meant that we've created an industry that is in effect the envy of a lot of the industries across Europe. Not in terms of scale, but in terms of what we've been able to do in a small island.
Let's jump to, I was going to hold that until later, but I think actually that you've raised it, so that's a useful point to raise that issue. How many small wind farms are there? I mean, how would you define a small wind farm?
No, so there are some projects in Ireland that would be wind farms of maybe 2-3 turbines, or maybe less than 6-8 megawatts. We would define those as small. However, I guess I'd like to come back to a separate area, which is around microgeneration. I think we need to talk about microgeneration in Ireland as a subject in terms of the future of the industry. But we have a range in Ireland. So we have developers who are very significant in scale in terms of their investment, that own small wind farms, and also own wind farms that are greater than 50 megawatts. So a project that's greater than 50 megawatts would be considered from a planning perspective to be large in scale. So over the last number of years, projects have ranged from 1 or 2 turbines right up to projects 25, 30 turbines, and now we're seeing some projects that are going through planning, and certainly one that has planning in Galway that are of the scale of about 160 megawatts.
Is there, in terms of the Infrastructure Act, which requires, in terms of changes the planning procedure, is there a cutoff point in terms of the size of the wind farm as to when that applies and when it does not apply, or does that apply to any kind of wind farm or energy project?
In terms of seeking planning, a project that has over 25 turbines or is over 50 megawatts needs to go directly to Bord Pleanála. Projects below that don't need to go to Bord Pleanála. However, because of some of the challenges that the wind sector has been faced with particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, more and more projects are having to go through the Bord Pleanála stage as well. And that is a difficulty for the sector in terms of time, and that is something that certainly wasn't the case a number of years ago. Having said that, Bord Pleanála are processing those applications at a reasonable rate. So from a planning perspective, what we would say is, and we say this, it's not about wind everywhere, clearly, it's about wind in the right places. Over the last number of years, the success rate for planning is around the range of 55 to sort of 60%. So there is a risk associated with wind energy development, and everybody goes into that with their eyes wide open. Besides
Developers of wind farms are also service people, also in your group, bankers, lawyers,
absolutely,
accountants, and that. So
we
for financing purposes, I assume.
So IWEA is more than just representing the development community. It's about the full supply chain. So it's a community of people that are advocates and are in the business of developing renewables in Ireland for business reasons, clearly, but also for assisting the government with meeting the government's targets. And without the association and the members of the association driving renewables, the Irish government will be exposed to implications at EU level for not being able to meet targets.
Now, I thought, Kenneth, it might be helpful for the audience to hear us go through the numbers in terms of the scope of that. Now, this is just the latest wind energy statistics. 228 wind farms on the island of Ireland, and 195 in the Republic of Ireland. So 33 in Northern Ireland. That's pretty much distribution.
Those numbers would be accurate. So where we are now is, and I always reflect on numbers on the basis of meeting national targets, EU binding national targets. So we are we're a little bit past halfway towards meeting the Republic of Ireland's national target of RESI, renewable electricity. So we obviously our target is the overall 16%, and as a subset of that target is 40% of the electricity demand in Ireland in 2020 must be met by renewable sources. Now it's a recognised fact that the vast majority of that need will be met by onshore wind. The target varies based on where demand is at, and we're at a critical pinch point now in the Irish energy system for a number of reasons. First is that we have 5 years to go. In fact, we've almost 4 years to go. Secondly, and thankfully, the energy system in Ireland, as a result of economic decline, demand was falling. We were now very confident that we will see demand take off again. So in terms of knowing what 40% of the demand was or was going to be, it has been somewhat of a moving feast. So at one point in time, there was a view based on demand growth, certainly in 2006, that the number of megawatts required to meet 40% of our target would have been in the region of 5,000 to 6,000 megawatts. Then that was reduced to between 3,500 to 4,000. So what we now know, and this is it will represent a seismic change in the energy system in Ireland as opposed to just the electricity system. We now know that EirGrid and ESB networks are working with IWEA clients in the ICT industry, companies of the ilk of Apple, Facebook, Google, etc., that have all either recently committed to build data centres in Ireland, or as business and work that we've done, we're aware will build data centres over the next number of years. And the interesting, while that is great from an FDI and Ireland Link perspective, from a renewables perspective, it's a fantastic good news story, in the sense that these companies are coming to Ireland for a range of reasons, but certainly in the top 5 is our climate and our phenomenal renewable energy resource. Renewables in Ireland are very close to the market. These companies are integrated into Ireland, so building their data centres and powering their data centres from wind energy is part of the FDI story in Ireland. So we can actually say with absolute certainty that wind energy is an enabler for foreign direct investment in Ireland. However, the challenge for us as an industry is we're at 2,250 megawatts right now. We have clear line of sight of the amount of megawatts that will be delivered over the next 2 to 3 years. But after that, urgent decisions need to be taken in the next 12 months to ensure that we don't have a stop-start industry. In general, EirGrid have confirmed that there's 1,000 megawatts of applications in the system, and 1,000 megawatts of applications for demand load in Ireland is phenomenal. When you look at that against the context of our overall demand in the system, we believe that there will be likely an 18% increase in the overall demand between now and 2020. So that does put all of the key stakeholders, the wind industry, the regulator, ESB networks, EirGrid, under a lot of pressure to be able to deliver the renewables target, continue to deliver safe, secure, reliable grid that meets the needs of consumers and industry, but also meets the needs then of the foreign direct investment that wants to come to Ireland.
Are Google and the IT companies going to build their own wind farms, or are they going to just contract that out, or take the energy from somebody who's going to do it?
So it's likely that I guess the best way to describe this is that we currently have a model similar to what will continue to happen with data centres in Ireland. So it's not widely known, but when you walk into IKEA in Dublin, the IKEA experience is being powered by wind energy.
Mm-hmm.
So IKEA own, I believe it's a 11.8 megawatt wind farm in Leitrim.
Mm-hmm.
That wind farm powers their operations on the island of Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So as I understand, they own that wind farm, they sell their power from their own wind farm to a supply company called VEU, and
Mm-hmm.
VEU then sell it back to them on their customer side.
Okay.
So by doing that, they've obviously dramatically reduced their carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
IKEA is one of the leading companies globally in terms of environmental responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally and importantly, they've been able to secure longer term prices for their power, which is good for them as a business, and good for the environment, and good for their overall image. From a data center perspective, I think it's likely that they will follow the same trend. They may do some JVs, they may do some power purchase agreements, but I think eventually the kind of companies that we're talking about, the ability to raise the capital, or they certainly have the capital to certainly buy wind farms in Ireland, own, and have somebody else operate them on their behalf, and those projects power their data centres. And
When I think it would be useful for the audience to understand a term that I think is not widely understood in larger audience, and that is what installed wind energy capacity is.
okay, so I guess the best way to describe this is that our national demand in wintertime is about 4,700 megawatts.
Mm-hmm.
And if all the wind is blowing, which it's not all, I mean, we have times when we meet 50% of demand, but
Mm-hmm.
if all the wind on the island is blowing, we'd reach 2,250 megawatts. That's quite unlikely to be happening. So the way we look at how wind matches the overall demand, we look at it on a yearly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's related to the capacity factor of wind farms.
Mm-hmm.
So wind farms are financed and built based on delivering power for about 33% of the year.
Okay.
However, because they deliver power for 33% of the year, is associated with the availability of wind.
Mm-hmm.
The availability of the turbines to produce power, if the resource exists, is usually higher than thermal generation. So the availability of the turbine, the blades, the whole structure
Mm-hmm.
to be able to produce energy, if the fuel exists, is anything from 98 to 100%.
Okay.
And I know from personal experience from managing power plants that the availability of power plants, even though the fuel is coming in the pipeline, can be significantly lower than that. So there's often this misconception that wind energy plants aren't available. They are available. It is the availability of the resource. The national discourse in Ireland on energy completely misses the fact that 1 in every 5 units of energy consumed last year in Ireland was from renewable energy, and the vast majority of that being from wind.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that should be something that we're extremely proud of.
Mm-hmm.
That as over a relatively short period of time, we're integrating our own energy to power ourselves, and weaning ourselves off imported fossil fuels.
What's your sense of how much more from wind energy you can produce? What's the ceiling there?
As an engineer, there are fundamental, technical and electrical issues that must be cared for. So, I believe that we can continue to integrate wind well beyond 40%, but we can only do that if the right policy components are in place. And what I mean by that is a functioning market that is not too penal on wind, additional interconnection, and importantly, the characteristics of the existing electrical generation fleet in Ireland needs to change to accommodate wind. So there's a program in place called the DS3 program, which is essentially to ensure that wind can move beyond meeting 50% of demand as an absolute technical limit to 75% of demand. And if we achieve that, and I think we can with the right will and stakeholder engagement, Ireland will be a leader in Europe in terms of integration of wind.
Let's go to that issue of why there is this kind of opposition and the selling job that needs to be done there. How widespread do you think the opposition is to wind farms? It's fairly recent. And how widespread do you think it is? Are you finding it geographically limited? Are you finding it spread across the countryside?
Okay, I guess the best way to answer that is that it's something that we're very keen to monitor and assess.
Sure.
So in doing so, we carried out an Ipsos MRBI poll that asked the question of the general public: are you in favour of the continued development of wind energy in Ireland? And 80% of those who responded to the poll, and it was a geographical spread poll across the 4 counties, 4 provinces, were in favour of the continued development of wind energy, with 7% opposed and the other 13% undecided. So that would give one sort of a lot of positive momentum in terms of what the general discourse is like, accepting that's a poll and it's at a point in time. I think that when you get to a scale where wind energy in Ireland is close to 2,500 megawatts, there was always going to be a point where it became more visible.
Right.
However, we know that from talking to tourists and Bord Fáilte, that tourists come to Ireland and they look at wind energy and think it's a fantastic thing. We know that in other countries, certainly Denmark and Germany, that it's just part of the national landscape and it's viewed as symbolic of progress. You asked me, was there an area or regional concern, for the want of a better word? Certainly what we've seen is there was a lightning rod was the discussion around exporting energy from the Midlands and Ireland.
The Midland project,
and
yeah.
It really bothered me that the national conversation around wind energy got linked to grid, because
Because of the pylons.
Right. Because we're forgetting that when we built Ardna Crusher, when we built Money Point, when we built any of the big power stations in the country, we didn't just magic the pylons into beside those power stations. We needed to build a grid. The grid is required for a range of reasons. It's required for securing generation, bring generation to load, voltage reasons, and developing areas for demand. There was an attempt to link grid development required for regional development and all the issues I mentioned there to purely wind, and that was fundamentally wrong. There was certainly an attempt to link the export projects and grid together, and those export projects which were discussed at the time would have had their own independent grid and never touched the Irish system.
Is that Midlands project dead in the water now? Or is that potentially revivable at a smaller scale?
So, wow, a lot has changed since then, in the sense that the UK government have made a phenomenal turnabout in their support for renewables, and their direction of travel seems to be for nuclear and fracking,
Right.
and that certainly, the evidence suggests that will expose the UK consumer to more costs.
And do you work with any cooperative wind farms as part of the association?
So no, we don't, and that's very much a Danish model. So what IWEA does is we support our members and interact with stakeholders. Certainly there has been talk of co-ops, and I think there's maybe
Couple
one or two co-ops in Ireland. Yeah. What we really feel is the right approach is that microgeneration should be supported. And the rationale for that is, although there will be a cost, we think it's right and proper that communities have the opportunity to be part of the low carbon transition. So if you're part of if you have an SME business in Ireland, and you have a load of relative significance, wouldn't it be fantastic to be able to put up a renewable generation facility on your plant? Now, what we would say is there needs to be a structure around how that is done, and there is little point in putting up a wind turbine in an area that's not windy, and there's little point in putting up a wind turbine that is a machine that's not validated and maybe authorised and that's gone through a technical assessment. So wind in the right place, using the correct technology at a support level that is fair to the Irish consumer and allows the Irish citizen, where they have the resource, to be able to be part of the low carbon transition. The challenge is that there's a view that in terms of bang for your buck, that the economies of scale for the support you give are better for larger projects. And look, we have big stretching, big targets to reach, and that's important. But we need to bring everybody with us on that journey. And we've recognised that many years ago, and we've sought stakeholder support for that. And unfortunately, to date, that has not materialised. But we continue to ask.
Do you work with the environmental organisations? In again, we're talking about this whole sales pitch, but in fact, a way of communicating and building the narrative out in the larger community about the value of wind energy. It's a natural alliance. Have you worked with them much?
We certainly interact and make contact. So when we do something, and when I say do something, when we issue reports or if it's a response to a county development plan or we have an area of concern, we would reach out, and vice versa, they do the same. Do we have working groups together? No. And do we bump into each other around events in town and in Dublin? Absolutely. Do we have strong relationships? Yes. Are there things that we could do together more concretely? Probably.
Let me, if I can, maybe finish with this. Is there a policy within the IWEA to not comment or oppose fossil fuel developments? What I'm thinking of is fracking, obviously, as well. And there was a recent report in The Guardian where some of the members of the European and the British Wind Energy Association were also fossil fuel companies who had branched out into, and that they were kind of undermining the renewable energy goals in the European Union on behalf of the European Wind Energy Association, because they were major players. Are there people within your organization which are kind of have a foot in both camps, either fossil fuel developments and wind or renewables?
The clear direction of travel, despite any assertion from any other party, is wind will continue to have a huge role to play right across Europe. In terms of IWEA, the way we work our conversations, so we have subgroups and they're focused on sectoral issues around whether it be planning, market, grid, but we have a council body that is the decision-making body, and we leave emotions at the door in that regard. So when people come to sit around the IWEA table, they're sitting to represent their business interests in wind. And clearly some of those companies are wind developer companies and have interest in no other area. Other companies have, because of the legacy, have interest in other forms of power generation. But there has to be maturity to the discussion, and what I mean by that is, yes, renewables are going to continue to be part of the narrative in Ireland and push out fossil fuels. And I think you potentially could see other renewables in Ireland. So I mean, there are companies now who are interested in solar. There are certainly solar members who have been active in biomass. And we unashamedly are pro all forms of renewables, but the one that we're most pro is wind, because we believe, as do our members, that wind energy is the least cost renewable solution for Ireland. And that's until that changes, which I don't think is going to change anytime soon. That will be our reason for getting out of bed in the morning and sitting around this table.
Kenneth, thanks for talking with us.
No problem. You're very welcome.